The hammer fell against the shoe with a rhythm that had become as familiar to Adelaide Wright as her own heartbeat, and she had never imagined that sound would one day bring her the love of her life. The spring of 1878 had arrived in Hays City, Kansas, with all the promise of new beginnings, though Adelaide had little time to notice such things. Her days were consumed with fire and metal, with the patient handling of horses and the careful shaping of iron. She had not chosen this life, but it had chosen her when her brother Thomas collapsed one morning at the forge, his breathing shallow and his skin pale as fresh milk. The doctor said his lungs were bad, weakened from years of inhaling smoke and metal dust, and that he needed rest if he hoped to see another winter. So Adelaide, 20 years old and as strong as any woman in Hays City, took up the tools of her brother's trade. She had always been around the smithy, helping where she could, learning without truly meaning to. Now those idle observations became vital knowledge, and her capable hands learned to do what most considered man's work. The first few weeks had been the hardest. Men came to the shop expecting Thomas and found Adelaide instead. Some laughed, some sneered, others simply turned and left, unwilling to trust their valuable animals to a woman's care. But Adelaide persisted, and slowly, grudgingly, the people of Hays City began to accept that Thomas Wright's sister could shoe a horse as well as any farrier in Kansas. It was on a Tuesday morning in late April when Samuel Everett first rode into her life. Adelaide was bent over the hoof of a merchant's mare, trimming away the excess growth with practiced precision, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching at an easy pace. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. The man who dismounted from the big sorrel gelding was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on his own 2 feet, and when he turned to look at her, Adelaide found herself staring into eyes the color of summer sky. "This the Wright smithy?" he asked, his voice carrying the slow drawl of Texas. "It is," Adelaide replied, setting down her tools. "What can I do for you?" He led the sorrel forward, and Adelaide could see the animal favoring his left front hoof slightly. "He threw a shoe about 2 miles back. Need him fixed up proper." "I can do that." Adelaide approached the horse slowly, speaking softly as she ran her hand along his neck. The sorrel was a fine animal, well cared for despite the dust of the trail. "What's his name?" "Copper," the cowboy said, and something in his tone softened when he spoke of the horse. "Had him since he was foaled. 4 years now." Adelaide nodded, already examining the hoof. The shoe had come clean off, and thankfully there was no damage to the hoof wall itself. "He will be good as new in about an hour. You can wait if you like, or come back." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, and Adelaide felt the weight of his gaze. She had grown used to skepticism, to doubt, but what she saw in his eyes was different. It was curiosity, perhaps, and something else she could not quite name. "I will wait," he said finally. "Name's Samuel Everett." "Most folks call me Sam." "Adelaide Wright," she replied, leading Copper toward the forge. "Most folks call me Adelaide." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, quick and unexpected. "Fair enough, Adelaide." She set to work, acutely aware of his presence as he leaned against the fence rail, watching. Most men who stayed talked constantly, offering unwanted advice or questioning her methods. Samuel Everett said nothing, simply observed with those calm blue eyes, and somehow that made Adelaide more nervous than all the bluster in the world. She heated the iron in the forge until it glowed orange-red, then shaped it on the anvil with sure strikes of her hammer. The work steadied her, focusing her attention on the task at hand rather than the stranger watching her. She had always loved this part, the transformation of raw metal into something useful and necessary. There was honest magic in it, the kind that came from skill and sweat rather than mystery. When she fitted the shoe to Copper's hoof, it was perfect. She nailed it in place with careful precision, then filed down the edges until everything was smooth. The entire process took just under an hour, and when she straightened, her back aching slightly, Samuel was still there, still watching. "That's fine work," he said, moving to examine the hoof himself. Copper stood patient and calm as Samuel ran his hand down the leg, checking Adelaide's work. When he looked up, there was approval in his eyes, genuine and unforced. "Real fine work." "That will be 50 cents, Adelaide said, fighting the flush that threatened to rise to her cheeks. Samuel paid her without complaint, counting out the coins into her palm. His fingers brushed hers briefly, calloused and warm, and Adelaide pulled back as if burned. "Thank you," he said, swinging up into the saddle with easy grace. "I expect I will be back. A man's horse needs regular attention, and I can see you know what you are doing." "Any time," Adelaide replied, watching as he turned Copper back toward the main street of town. She expected that to be the end of it. Cowboys came through Hayes City all the time, stopping for supplies or repairs before moving on to wherever the work took them. But the next Tuesday, Samuel Everett returned. "Time for Copper to be checked," he said by way of greeting. "Want to make sure those shoes are holding up proper." Adelaide examined all 4 hooves, knowing full well that the shoes were fine but saying nothing. She cleaned the hooves, checked for any signs of thrush or cracks, and pronounced Copper in excellent health. "That will be 25 cents, she said. Samuel paid, tipped his hat, and rode away. The Tuesday after that, he came again. This time he brought a pack horse that genuinely needed new shoes, and Adelaide spent the afternoon working on both animals. Samuel sat in the shade of the smithy's overhang, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife, the shavings falling in pale curls at his feet. "You work for one of the ranches around here?" Adelaide asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "The Bar Cross, about 15 miles northwest," he replied without looking up from his whittling. "Been there about 6 months now. Good outfit, fair boss. That is a long ride for horseshoeing." Now he did look up, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Maybe I think it is worth the ride." Adelaide turned back to her work, her heart beating faster than the heat of the forge could account for. She said nothing, but she was smiling as she shaped the iron. The visits became a pattern. Every Tuesday, without fail, Samuel Everett would ride into Hayes City and find some reason to bring Copper to Adelaide's forge. Sometimes it was legitimate work, shoes that genuinely needed replacing or hooves that needed trimming. Other times it was the flimsiest of excuses, reasons so transparent that they both knew the truth, but neither acknowledged it. Adelaide found herself looking forward to Tuesdays with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. She would wake early on those mornings, taking extra care with her appearance even though she knew she would be covered in soot and sweat within an hour of starting work. She wore her good work dress, the blue one that brought out the color of her eyes, and she made sure her dark hair was neatly braided down her back. Thomas noticed, of course. Her brother spent his days resting in the small house they shared behind the smithy, slowly regaining his strength. He watched from the window sometimes, and Adelaide knew he saw Samuel's regular visits. "That cowboy is here again," Thomas said one evening as they ate supper together. "The one from the Bar Cross." "Samuel Everett," Adelaide replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "He is a good customer." "He is a smitten man," Thomas said with a wheezing laugh, "and unless I miss my guess, you are not exactly indifferent to him either." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm. "Do not be ridiculous. He just appreciates good work." Sure he does, Thomas agreed, but his eyes were twinkling. And I am certain that has nothing to do with the fact that he rides 30 miles round trip every week when there is a perfectly good farrier in Ellis, which is half the distance from the Bar Cross. Adelaide had no answer to that, so she focused on her meal and tried to ignore her brother's knowing smile. As spring turned toward summer, the visits continued. Samuel began to stay longer, helping Adelaide with small tasks around the smithy. He would work the bellows for her when she needed both hands free, or hold a particularly fractious horse steady while she worked. They talked while they worked, conversations that ranged from the mundane to the meaningful. Adelaide learned that Samuel was 24, that he had come north from Texas after his parents died, looking for a fresh start. He had worked cattle drives and breaking horses, ranch work, and whatever else would pay. He spoke of the open range with a love that Adelaide understood, for she felt the same way about her work, about the satisfaction of creating something with her own two hands. Samuel learned that Adelaide had grown up in Hays City, that her parents had died in a cholera outbreak when she was 15, leaving her and Thomas to fend for themselves. He learned that she loved the forge despite never having planned to work it, that she found peace in the rhythm of hammer on anvil, that she took pride in doing work that most people assumed she could not do. "You are extraordinary," Samuel said one afternoon in June. They were alone in the smithy, Adelaide fitting a shoe while Samuel held Copper's leg steady. "You know that, right?" Adelaide looked up, meeting his eyes across the horse's back. "I am just doing what needs doing." "No," Samuel said firmly. "Most people just do what needs doing. You do it with skill and grace and a kind of stubborn determination that takes my breath away. You are extraordinary, Adelaide Wright, and I hope you know it." She ducked her head, unable to hold his gaze, her heart hammering in her chest. "You should not say such things." "Why not if they are true?" Adelaide had no answer to that, so she finished chewing Copper in silence. But it was a silence charged with things unsaid, with possibilities that hummed between them like heat rising from the forge. The next week, Samuel brought her a gift. It was a small thing, a ribbon the color of cornflowers, wrapped in brown paper. "Saw it in the general store," he said, his voice gruff with embarrassment. "Made me think of your eyes." Adelaide took the ribbon with trembling hands. No one had ever given her such a thing before, nothing frivolous and pretty and entirely unnecessary. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is beautiful." "So are you," Samuel said, and this time Adelaide did not look away. That evening, she wore the ribbon in her hair, braiding it through the dark strands, and when Thomas saw it, he smiled but said nothing. July brought heat that shimmered off the plains in waves, turning the horizon into something fluid and uncertain. Adelaide worked through it, the forge making the already oppressive heat nearly unbearable. She tied her hair up off her neck and rolled up her sleeves and kept going, because the work did not stop for weather. Samuel arrived on a Tuesday afternoon so hot that even the birds had gone quiet. He looked worried as he dismounted, and Adelaide felt a spike of concern. "What is wrong? Is Copper all right?" "Copper is fine," Samuel assured her quickly. "But I need to talk to you. Can you take a break?" Adelaide set down her tools and followed him into the shade. They had a bucket of water drawn fresh from the well that morning, still relatively cool, and she offered him a dipper. He drank, then handed it back so she could drink as well. "There is talk of me moving on," Samuel said without preamble. "The Bar Cross is good work, but it is not my own. I have been saving, thinking about maybe starting my own place. Smaller outfit, but mine." Adelaide's heart sank. "Where?" "That is just it," Samuel said, turning to face her fully. "I have been thinking maybe I should stay around here. Put down roots in Kansas instead of moving on like I have always done." "Why?" Adelaide asked, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. Samuel reached out and took her hand, his palm rough and warm against hers. "Because I have found something here worth staying for, someone worth staying for. Adelaide, these past months, coming to see you, talking with you, learning who you are, it has been the best part of my life. I think about you all week, counting the days until Tuesday, looking for excuses to come to town. I am not good with words, but I need you to know that I care for you. Deeply." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "I care for you too. I look forward to Tuesdays more than I can say. The smithy feels emptier on the days when you are not here." "Then let me keep coming," Samuel said softly. "Let me court you proper, Adelaide. Let me see if we might build something together, something real and lasting." "Yes," Adelaide whispered. "Yes, I would like that very much." Samuel smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender that Adelaide felt her breath catch. "Then I will be here every Tuesday, and any other day you will have me." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Adelaide's life. Samuel came to town more than once a week now, arranging his work at the ranch so he could visit on Sundays as well. They would walk through Hayes City together, Adelaide's hand tucked into the crook of his arm, talking and laughing. He met Thomas properly, sitting with him in the evening and discussing horses and metalwork, carefully earning her brother's approval. Thomas gave it gladly. "He is a good man," he told Adelaide one evening after Samuel had ridden back to the ranch. "Honest and hardworking. He looks at you like you hung the moon. You could do far worse." "I could not do better," Adelaide replied softly. As summer faded into autumn, Adelaide noticed that Thomas was getting stronger. His breathing was easier, his color better. He began to spend time in the smithy again, at first just watching, then slowly taking up the lighter tasks. By September he was working half days, and Adelaide could see the joy it brought him to be back at his trade. "I will be able to take over fully come winter," Thomas said one afternoon. "You have done more than I could have asked, Adelaide. You saved the business, saved my livelihood, but I know this is not what you want to spend your life doing." Adelaide looked around the smithy at the forge and the anvil and the tools she had come to know so well. "I have grown to love it," she admitted. "But you are right, it is your dream, not mine. I do not know what mine is yet." "Maybe you do," Thomas said gently. "Maybe it has blue eyes and comes calling every Tuesday." Adelaide felt herself blush, but she did not deny it. October brought the changing of the leaves and a crispness to the air that made the forge's heat more bearable. Samuel came on a Tuesday carrying a bundle of wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, their colors bright against the fading landscape. "They are not much," he said, offering them to her, "but I saw them and thought of you." Adelaide took them with a smile, burying her face in the blooms. "They are perfect." They worked together that afternoon, the pattern so familiar now that they moved around each other with easy coordination. Samuel held horses steady while Adelaide worked, pumped the bellows when she needed it, handed her tools before she had to ask. It was a dance they had perfected over months of Tuesdays, a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. When the last horse was done and the forge was banked for the evening, Samuel did not immediately leave. Instead, he stood in the doorway of the smithy, backlit by the setting sun, watching Adelaide clean her tools with an expression she could not quite read. "Adelaide," he said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, setting down the file she had been cleaning. Samuel crossed the space between them, taking both her hands in his. "I have been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to find the right words, the right time. But I am beginning to realize there will never be a perfect moment, and I cannot wait any longer." Adelaide's heart began to race. "Samuel," he took a deep breath. I love you, Adelaide Wright. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you laugh when you think no one is listening. I love how you are not afraid of hard work, how you took on this forge and made it yours when you needed to. I love the way you talk to horses, gentle and patient. I love waking up on Tuesday mornings because I know I will see you. I love every single thing about you, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Tears were streaming down Adelaide's face now, but she was smiling. Samuel. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring. I know I am just a cowboy, and I do not have much to offer yet, but I am saving to buy my own land, and I will work every day of my life to give you the home you deserve. Adelaide Wright, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Adelaide said without hesitation. Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. You are everything I never knew I was looking for. Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close as she cried happy tears against his chest. When she finally looked up, he kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. They were married in November on a crisp Saturday morning with the sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Samuel wore his best suit, borrowed from the ranch foreman. Thomas gave her away, his eyes bright with tears and pride, and the whole town turned out to witness Adelaide Wright become Adelaide Everett. The ceremony was held in the small church at the center of Hayes City. The pews packed with people who had watched Adelaide grow from a girl into a woman, who had doubted her, and then come to respect her. Samuel's friends from the bar cross were there, good men who clapped him on the back and wished him well. The ranch owner himself, Mr. Henderson, attended with his wife, a generous gift of money tucked into an envelope that would help the young couple start their life together. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the town hall, with music and dancing and more food than Adelaide had seen in one place since she was a child. She danced with Samuel until her feet ached, laughing as he spun her around the floor with more enthusiasm than skill. She danced with Thomas too, grateful that he was well enough to stand up with her, and with Mr. Henderson, who told her that Samuel was the best hand he had ever hired, and he was sorry to lose him but happy for them both. "He is buying the old Morrison place," Mr. Henderson told her as they waltzed. "Did he tell you? About 5 miles from town, nice piece of land. The house needs work, but the bones are good. I co-signed the loan myself. Samuel is a good man, Mrs. Everett. You have chosen well." "Thank you," Adelaide said, her heart full, "for everything you have done for him for us." The evening ended late, and Samuel drove them to their new home in a borrowed wagon, Adelaide tucked against his side despite the cold. The Morrison place was dark when they arrived, but Samuel had been out earlier to light lanterns, and their warm glow spilled from the windows into the night. He carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made Adelaide laugh even as she wrapped her arms around his neck. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Friends from town had furnished it with cast-offs and homemade goods, so there was a bed with a real mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a cookstove that worked, and enough dishes and linens to get them started. "Welcome home, Mrs. Everett," Samuel said, setting her down gently. Adelaide looked around their little house at all the promise it held and then back at her husband. "It is perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, in the privacy of their own home, they came together as husband and wife, and Adelaide discovered that love could be expressed in ways that words could never capture. Samuel was tender and patient, murmuring his love against her skin, and Adelaide felt safe and cherished in his arms. They fell asleep tangled together, the future stretching out before them full of possibility. The early days of their marriage were busy ones. Samuel worked on fixing up the house and the outbuildings, repairing fences and clearing land. Adelaide helped where she could, but she also spent time at Thomas's smithy, teaching him the tricks she had learned and slowly transitioning the business back to him. Thomas was stronger now, able to work full days, and Adelaide was relieved to see him returning to the life he loved. In December, Samuel bought their first horse beyond Copper. She was a young mare, dapple gray and full of spirit, with good bloodlines and better temperament. Samuel planned to breed her, to start building a herd of quality horses that he could sell to ranches and the army. "It will take time," he told Adelaide one evening as they sat by the fire. "Years, probably, before we are really established. But we have time. We have all the time in the world." Adelaide leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I do not need riches, I just need you." "You have me," Samuel promised. "Forever." Winter settled over Kansas with snow and cold winds, and Adelaide learned to keep their little house warm and comfortable. She cooked meals on the temperamental cookstove, learning through trial and error what it would and would not do. She sewed curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed, sitting by lamplight in the evenings while Samuel read aloud from the newspaper or worked on tack that needed mending. They went to town every Sunday for church, and Adelaide would visit with Thomas afterward, making sure he was eating well and not overdoing it at the forge. Samuel would talk horses with anyone interested, slowly building a reputation as a man who knew his business when it came to horseflesh. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them and Thomas. Adelaide cooked a chicken and made biscuits and gravy, and they exchanged simple gifts. Samuel gave Adelaide a beautiful leather-bound journal and a pen, encouraging her to write down her thoughts and the details of their life together. Adelaide gave Samuel new gloves and a scarf she had knitted herself, practical things he needed for the cold work he did every day. The new year of 1879 arrived with bitter cold and deep snow. Samuel kept Copper and the mare in the small barn, breaking ice from their water twice a day and making sure they had enough hay. Adelaide discovered she was pregnant in January, a realization that brought equal parts joy and terror. "I am going to be a father," Samuel said wonderingly when she told him, his hand spread across her still flat stomach. "Adelaide, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he replied, pulling her close. "You have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed well through the winter and into spring. Adelaide continued to help Thomas at the forge when she could, though she tired more easily now. Samuel hovered over her like a nervous mother hen, insisting she rest, bringing her water and food without being asked, making sure she did not overdo it. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide told him, exasperated and charmed in equal measure. "I know," Samuel said. "But you are carrying the most precious thing in the world, and I will not take any chances with either of you." In May, as the prairie burst into bloom around them, Samuel sold 3 young horses to a rancher from Colorado for a good price. It was their first real success, proof that Samuel's plan could work, and they celebrated by buying a cow and chickens and the materials to build a proper chicken coop. Thomas came out to help with the building, and Adelaide sat in the shade and watched the 2 most important men in her life work side by side. Her brother looked healthy again, his color good and his breathing strong. The rest had saved him, and Adelaide sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. "You did good, little sister," Thomas said later, sitting beside her while Samuel finished hammering in the last boards. "With the smithy with him, you did real good." "I got lucky," Adelaide replied. "No," Thomas disagreed. "Luck is finding gold in a stream." What you did was work hard and make smart choices and refuse to give up when things got difficult. That is not luck. That is character. The baby came in September, arriving in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. Samuel rode hard for the doctor while a neighbor woman who had delivered half the babies in Ellis County stayed with Adelaide. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Adelaide was not sure she could do it, when the pain seemed too much to bear. But then Samuel was back, the doctor with him, and her husband held her hand and told her she was strong, she was amazing, she could do this. And finally, after hours that felt like years, the baby arrived with a loud wail that announced his presence to the world. "A boy," the doctor said, placing the squalling infant in Adelaide's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Adelaide looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air, and felt love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Samuel knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect. Adelaide, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Samuel Everett, after both his uncle and his father, and the baby became the center of their world. Adelaide discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, waking multiple times each night to feed him, changing endless diapers, soothing him when he cried. Samuel helped with everything, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, absolutely besotted with the tiny human they had created. Thomas the elder visited often, clearly touched that his sister had named the baby after him. He brought gifts, practical things like a cradle he had made himself, and baby clothes purchased from the general store. He would sit for hours holding his nephew, telling him stories about his mother's childhood, about the adventures they had shared. "He is lucky to have you both," Thomas told them one afternoon. "This boy is going to grow up knowing he is loved, and that is the greatest gift you can give a child." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Adelaide learned to function on little sleep, to nurse the baby while cooking dinner, to soothe him with one hand while doing laundry with the other. Samuel took on more of the outside work, caring for the animals and the land so Adelaide could focus on their son. The horse business grew slowly but steadily. Samuel had a gift for training, and word spread that Samuel Everett could take a green horse and turn it into something reliable and useful. People began bringing him animals to break, paying good money for the service. Combined with the horses he was breeding and selling, they were making a modest living. By the time young Thomas was walking, Adelaide and Samuel had expanded their barn and added 3 more broodmares to their stock. They hired a young man from town to help with the work, and Adelaide sometimes thought about how far they had come from that first Tuesday when Samuel had ridden into her life with a horse that needed shoeing. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas was asleep inside, finally worn out after a day of toddling around getting into everything, giving up the smithy to be a rancher's wife. Adelaide considered the question seriously. She did miss the forge sometimes, the satisfaction of shaping iron, the pride of doing work that others thought beyond her. But when she weighed that against what she had now, this man who loved her completely, the son who was the image of his father, the life they were building together, there was no contest. "I have no regrets," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Samuel took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you, Adelaide Everett, more every day somehow. I did not think that was possible, but it is." "I love you too," Adelaide replied. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to come back every Tuesday until I realized what I would be losing if I let you go." Best decision I ever made, Samuel said, was throwing that shoe 2 miles out of town so I would have an excuse to stop at your forge. Adelaide turned to stare at him. You threw the shoe deliberately, Samuel grinned, shameless and charming. Copper was perfectly sound, but I had seen you working as I rode past a few times and I wanted an excuse to talk to you. So I removed his shoe myself and rode in like I needed help. Adelaide burst out laughing. All this time I thought it was chance, fate, luck, and you sabotaged your own horse. Not sabotaged, Samuel protested. Just created an opportunity, and you have to admit it worked out pretty well. Pretty well, Adelaide agreed, still laughing. Yes, I suppose you could say that. The years flowed by like water over stones, wearing away the rough edges and leaving something smooth and strong behind. Young Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father did. He would follow Samuel everywhere, chattering constantly, wanting to help with every task. Adelaide had a second child in the spring of 1882, a daughter they named Ruth Grace. She was a calm baby, so different from her brother, content to lie in her cradle and watch the world with serious dark eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister, bringing her things he thought she might like: flowers from the prairie, smooth stones, a feather from a hawk. The ranch grew as well. They added cattle to their livestock, just a small herd at first, but it was another source of income. Samuel's reputation for training horses was such that he sometimes had to turn away business, and they talked about hiring another hand to help. The little house was expanded, 2 more rooms added so the children could have their own space. Thomas Wright's health remained good, and he continued to work his forge in Hayes City. He never married, content with his work and his place in the world. He was a devoted uncle, visiting often and spoiling his niece and nephew shamelessly. Adelaide knew he was happy, and that brought her peace. In 1884, Samuel bought out the ranch next to theirs, expanding their holdings significantly. It was a big risk, taking on that much debt, but the gamble paid off. The additional grazing land meant they could support a larger cattle herd, and there was a natural spring on the property that never went dry, even in the driest summers. Adelaide learned to manage the household accounts, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with income and expenses. She discovered she had a head for business, and Samuel relied on her judgment when making decisions about the ranch. They were partners in every sense of the word, each bringing different strengths to their life together. Young Thomas, now 6 years old, started school in Hayes City, riding into town with his father 3 days a week. He was bright and curious, learning to read and write with ease. Ruth, at 3, was still too young for school, so she stayed home with Adelaide, helping with small tasks around the house and playing with the barn cats that kept the mice away from the grain. Adelaide was pregnant again, though she had not yet told Samuel. She wanted to be sure, to wait until she was past the first dangerous months. But she felt the familiar signs and knew that come spring, they would have another child. The thought filled her with a mix of excitement and apprehension. 2 children already kept her busy from dawn until well past dark. How would she manage 3? But she would manage, the same way she had managed the forge, the same way she had managed everything life had thrown at her. She was strong, capable, and she had Samuel by her side. Together they could handle anything. She told him on Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep and they sat together by the fire. Samuel was cleaning his rifle, getting ready for a hunting trip in the new year, when Adelaide sat down beside him and took his hand. "Samuel, I have something to tell you." He set down the rifle immediately, giving her his full attention. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Adelaide assured him. "Better than fine. Samuel, we are going to have another baby." The joy that lit up his face was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Adelaide, that is wonderful news. Another baby, how are you feeling?" "When? I am feeling well, just tired. And I think sometime in May if I am calculating correctly." They sat together, planning and dreaming about the future, about their growing family and the ranch that would be their children's legacy. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been, struggling to keep her brother's smithy running, never imagining that a chance encounter on a Tuesday morning would lead to all of this. The third child arrived in May of 1885, another boy they named Henry. He had Samuel's blue eyes and Adelaide's dark hair, and he was loud from the moment he was born, announcing his every need at top volume. Young Thomas, now 7, was less impressed with babies than he had been when Ruth was born, but Ruth, now 4, was enchanted with her baby brother. The house was chaos with 3 children, toys underfoot and constant noise and more laundry than Adelaide had thought possible. But it was a good chaos, filled with love and laughter. Samuel was an involved father, changing diapers and soothing nightmares and reading bedtime stories. They worked together to manage the children and the ranch, a team in everything. In the summer of 1886, Adelaide's brother Thomas fell ill again. It came on suddenly, a fever and cough that would not break. The doctor said it was pneumonia, that his weakened lungs could not fight it off. Adelaide spent as much time as she could at his bedside, but she had 3 young children who needed her, and she was torn between duty to her brother and duty to her family. Samuel, seeing her distress, hired a woman from town to stay with Thomas around the clock, to make sure he was comfortable and cared for. Adelaide visited every day, sitting with her brother, talking about their childhood and all the years since. "You have built a good life," Thomas told her one afternoon, his voice weak but content. "I am proud of you, Adelaide, of everything you have become." "You saved me," Adelaide said, tears streaming down her face. "When Mama and Papa died, you kept us together. You taught me to be strong, to work hard, to never give up. Everything good in my life I owe to you." "You always had it in you," Thomas replied. "I just gave you a place to discover it." He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Adelaide grieved deeply for the brother who had been father and friend and teacher all in one. They buried him in the cemetery outside Hayes City, and half the town came to pay their respects to the man who had shod their horses and mended their tools for so many years. Adelaide inherited the smithy, and after much discussion, she and Samuel decided to hire a young farrier looking to establish himself. The man would run the business and give Adelaide a percentage of the profits. It seemed the right solution, keeping Thomas's legacy alive while providing income for their family. The grief faded slowly, as grief does, softening into memory and gratitude for the time they had shared. Adelaide poured herself into her family and the ranch, finding purpose in the daily rhythms of their life. Samuel was her rock, patient and understanding, holding her when she cried and giving her space when she needed it. The children grew. Young Thomas, now 9, could ride as well as any hand on the ranch. He helped his father with the horses, showing an intuitive understanding of the animals that made Samuel burst with pride. Ruth, at 6, started school and loved it, coming home each day full of stories about what she had learned. Henry, at 2, was a holy terror, getting into everything and keeping Adelaide constantly on her toes. In 1888, Adelaide was pregnant again, though this pregnancy was harder than the others had been. She was tired all the time, her back aching, and she wondered if perhaps she was getting too old for this. She was 31 now, which was not old exactly, but she felt every year of it. The baby came early, in the middle of winter, arriving during a blizzard that made getting the doctor impossible. Samuel delivered his own daughter with shaking hands and fervent prayers, and somehow both Adelaide and the baby came through it safely. They named her Clara, and she was small but healthy, with a surprisingly strong grip for such a tiny thing. Adelaide recovered slowly from the birth, and Samuel took over even more of the childcare and household work, insisting she rest and heal properly. "No more," Adelaide told him one night as they lay in bed, Clara sleeping in a cradle beside them. "4 children is enough, more than enough." "I just want you healthy," Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "However many children we have, whatever life brings, all that matters is that you are here with me." The next years were full and busy. The ranch prospered, their herd growing and their reputation for quality horses spreading across Kansas and into neighboring states. They hired more hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse Samuel had built and who were loyal to the brand. Young Thomas, now approaching his teenage years, was less interested in school and more interested in the ranch. He wanted to quit, to work full-time with his father, but Adelaide insisted he finish his education. "You can be both educated and a rancher," she told him firmly. "Knowledge is never wasted." Ruth, at 10, was the best student in her class. She loved books and learning, and Adelaide sometimes wondered if she might want something different than ranch life. Samuel said they would support whatever their children wanted to do, that they had built this life so their children would have choices. Henry, at 6, was wild and reckless, always climbing things he should not climb and doing things that turned Adelaide's hair gray. But he was sweet-natured too, bringing her flowers he picked from the prairie and crawling into her lap for cuddles, even though he thought he was too big for such things. Clara, at 3, was a quiet child who loved animals. She would sit for hours watching the chickens or petting the barn cats, perfectly content in her own company. Adelaide saw herself in Clara sometimes, that same self-contained strength, and wondered what her youngest daughter would become. In 1892, young Thomas was 16 and basically running the horse training program with his father. He had a gift for it, even more than Samuel did, a natural way with horses that made them trust him instantly. Samuel talked about making him a partner in the business, about eventually turning the ranch over to him. Ruth, at 14, had a beau who came calling on Sundays, a young man whose father owned the bank in Hays City. Adelaide watched her oldest daughter navigate the complicated waters of courtship and felt old. Had it really been 14 years since she was married, since Samuel had first ridden into her life? The years had been kind to them both. Samuel's hair was touched with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. But he was still strong and vital, still looking at Adelaide like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Adelaide herself had softened with age and childbearing, but she was content with who she was, comfortable in her own skin in a way she never had been as a young woman. They celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them taking an afternoon to themselves while the children were at school or occupied with chores. They rode out to the far corner of their property, to a spot that overlooked miles of rolling prairie. "Do you remember that first Tuesday?" Adelaide asked, sitting beside Samuel on a blanket spread across the grass. "When you came to the forge with copper?" "Every detail," Samuel replied. "You had soot on your face, and your hair was falling out of its braid, and you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I knew right then that I was going to marry you. I just had to convince you of it." "It did not take much convincing," Adelaide admitted. "You had me at the second visit, if I am being honest, maybe even the first. 15 years, Samuel mused. 4 children, a ranch, a life we built from nothing. Adelaide, it has been the greatest privilege of my life to be your husband. And mine to be your wife, Adelaide replied softly. I love you, Samuel Everett. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you quite a lot even then. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Adelaide thought about how lucky she was. So many things could have gone differently. Samuel could have ridden past her forge that day. He could have gone to a different farrier. He might never have come back for that second visit, and Adelaide's life would have been entirely different. But he had come back, week after week, Tuesday after Tuesday, until he asked her to marry him. And she had said yes, taking a leap of faith that had led to everything good in her life. In 1895, Ruth married her banker's son in a wedding even bigger than Adelaide and Samuel's had been. Young Thomas walked his sister down the aisle, looking uncomfortable in his suit but proud of the responsibility. Ruth was 18, the same age Adelaide had been when she had taken over the forge, and Adelaide marveled at how grown-up her daughter was. The young couple moved to Hayes City, where Ruth's husband would work at his father's bank and eventually take it over. Ruth was happy, and that was all Adelaide needed to know. They visited often, and Ruth wrote letters full of news about her new life. Young Thomas, now 19, did become a partner in the ranch. Samuel had the papers drawn up legal and proper, and they had a small ceremony in Hayes City to mark the occasion. Thomas Samuel Everett, Jr., half-owner of one of the most successful horse ranches in Kansas. Adelaide's heart could have burst with pride. Henry, at 12, was finally settling down slightly, focusing his energy on breaking horses with his father and brother. He had less patience than Thomas did but more daring, willing to get on horses that others would not touch. Adelaide worried constantly that he would get hurt, but Samuel said the boy had good instincts and would be fine. Clara, at 8, still spent more time with animals than people. She had announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, which was a peculiar ambition for a girl but one that Adelaide supported. If her daughter wanted to care for animals, who was Adelaide to tell her she could not? Adelaide herself had done work that women were not supposed to do, and it had served her well. The ranch continued to prosper. They had expanded their cattle operation significantly, and combined with the horse training and breeding, they were comfortably well off. Not rich by any means, but secure in a way that Adelaide had never taken for granted. She remembered too well what it was like to struggle, to worry about money, to work until her body ached just to keep food on the table. In 1897, Ruth had Adelaide's first grandchild, a boy named William. Adelaide held the tiny baby and felt the weight of time, the passage of years marked in generations. She was a grandmother now, 40 years old and still young enough to enjoy it but old enough to feel the significance. Samuel, at 44, was cutting back on the hardest physical work, leaving more of that to their sons and the ranch hands. He focused on the business side of things, on buying and selling, on making the decisions that would ensure the ranch's future. He was good at it, respected by other ranchers and businessmen throughout Kansas. Young Thomas courted and married a girl from Ellis County in 1899, bringing her to live at the ranch. Her name was Mary, and she was sweet and capable, fitting into the family easily. She and Adelaide worked together to manage the household, which had gotten more complicated now that there were ranch hands to feed and an expanding operation to support. Henry, at 17, announced he wanted to join the army. Adelaide's heart dropped at the news, but Samuel said the boy had to make his own choices. There was talk of war with Spain, tensions rising over Cuba, and Henry wanted to be part of something bigger than himself. Adelaide understood the impulse, but it did not make her worry any less. He left in the spring of 1899, looking impossibly young in his uniform. Adelaide hugged him tight, making him promise to write, to be careful, to come home safe. Henry promised everything she asked, and then he was gone, off to training and then to war. The months he was gone were the hardest of Adelaide's life. She jumped at every knock on the door, terrified it would be a telegram with bad news. She prayed more fervently than she ever had, bargaining with God to keep her son safe. Samuel held her at night when she could not sleep, whispering assurances that everything would be all right. Henry survived the war, coming home in late 1899 with stories of Cuba and San Juan Hill and the charge up Kettle Hill with the Rough Riders. He had seen death and hardship and the worst that humanity could do to itself, but he had come through it alive and relatively unscathed. Adelaide held him and cried and thanked God that her prayers had been answered. The new century arrived, 1900, bringing with it a sense of possibility and change. The Old West was fading into memory, railroads and telegraph lines bringing civilization to places that had once been wild. Hays City had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper community, with schools and churches and all the trappings of settled life. Adelaide and Samuel, now in their 40s, looked back on the life they had built with satisfaction. Their ranch was successful, their children were grown and happy, and they still loved each other as much as they had on that Tuesday in 1878 when everything had started. Clara, now 13, was still determined to work with animals. She spent time with the veterinarian who served the ranches around Hays City, learning everything he would teach her. He said she had real talent, a gift for understanding what an animal needed. Adelaide supported her daughter's unusual ambition, remembering how people had doubted her when she took over the forge. In 1902, Ruth had her second child, a daughter she named Adelaide after her mother. Adelaide the elder held her namesake and felt the circle of life completing itself. She was 44 now, her hair starting to gray, her body not as strong as it once had been. But she was happy, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that she had lived a good life. Young Thomas and Mary had their first child that same year, another grandson to carry on the Everett name. The ranch house was expanded again to accommodate the growing family, everyone living and working together in relative harmony. It was loud and chaotic and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also full of love. Henry, now 20, decided he wanted to stay near home after all. The army and the war had given him a taste of adventure, but it had also shown him that what he wanted was right here on the ranch with his family. He courted a girl from Hays City, the schoolteacher who had taught Clara, and they were married in a quiet ceremony in 1903. Samuel and Adelaide celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904. Their children threw them a party, inviting everyone they knew, and the ranch was full of people celebrating the couple who had built something lasting. 25 years, Samuel said in his speech, his arm around Adelaide's waist. A quarter of a century with the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She was shoeing horses and running a smithy when most women were worried about embroidery and tea parties. She took a chance on a cowboy who came to her forge with a lame horse and more hope than sense. She built a family and a home and a life that means everything to me. Adelaide Everett, you are the love of my life, and I would not change a single day of the 25 years we have spent together. Adelaide cried as she had on their wedding day, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. She looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the ranch they had built from nothing, at the man who had ridden into her life on a Tuesday and never left, and she knew that she was blessed beyond measure. Clara, at 17, announced she had been accepted to veterinary school in Chicago. It was far away and would be hard, but Adelaide and Samuel were proud of their daughter for chasing her dream. Not many women became veterinarians, but then not many women shod horses either. Clara had come by her determination honestly. The years continued their steady march. Young Thomas and Mary had more children. Henry and his wife did too. And the ranch house was always full of children playing and learning and growing. Ruth and her husband prospered in Hays City, adding more children to their family as well. Adelaide lost count of how many grandchildren she had, but loved each one fiercely. In 1908, Adelaide was 50 years old. It seemed impossible that so many years had passed since she was 20 and learning to work the forge, since that Tuesday when Samuel had first walked into her life. But she had been blessed with a good life, with work that mattered and a love that sustained her and children who made her proud. Samuel, now 54, moved slower than he once had, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But his mind was sharp, and his love for Adelaide undiminished. They still walked together in the evenings when weather permitted, talking about their day and their children and the ranch. They still shared a bed and held each other close, finding comfort in the familiar shape of each other's body. Clara graduated from veterinary school in 1910 and returned to Kansas to set up practice. She was the first female veterinarian in the state, and she faced skepticism and doubt just as Adelaide once had. But she persisted, and slowly people came to trust her skill and knowledge. Adelaide had never been prouder of any of her children than she was of Clara, who had dared to dream of something different and made it real. By 1912, Adelaide and Samuel had been married 33 years. They were grandparents many times over, and the ranch had grown to be one of the largest in the region. Young Thomas managed most of the daily operations now, with Henry handling the cattle side of things. Samuel still made the major decisions, but he was essentially retired, spending his days working on smaller projects and playing with his grandchildren. Adelaide's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. She managed the household, cooked for the family, and enjoyed her grandchildren. She thought sometimes about the forge, about the feel of hammer on anvil, about the satisfaction of shaping iron. Those had been good years, hard years, years that had shaped her as surely as she had shaped the metal. But she did not regret leaving that life behind for this one. One evening in late summer, Adelaide and Samuel sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, beautiful in the way that only Kansas sunsets could be. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of grass and horses and home. "Do you ever think about that first Tuesday?" Adelaide asked, the same question she had asked 15 years earlier on their anniversary. "All the time," Samuel replied, taking her hand. "I think about how lucky I was that copper threw that shoe. Or rather, that I was smart enough to take it off myself so I would have an excuse to talk to you." Adelaide laughed, as she always did when he admitted to his deception. "The best decision you ever made." "The best decision I ever made was coming back the next Tuesday," Samuel corrected. "And the Tuesday after that, and every Tuesday until you agreed to marry me. I was not going to give up, Adelaide. You were worth every mile, every excuse, every moment of uncertainty." "I love you," Adelaide said simply. "After all these years, through everything we have been through, I love you more than ever." "And I love you," Samuel replied. "My heart, my home, my everything." They sat together as darkness fell, hands joined, hearts full, grateful for the life they had built one Tuesday at a time. Around them, the ranch was settling in for the night, horses nickering in the barn, cattle lowing in the distance, grandchildren laughing somewhere inside the house. It was the sound of family, of legacy, of love that would endure long after they were gone. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been at 20, struggling to keep her brother's smithy running, never imagining that a cowboy with a lame horse would change her life forever. She thought about all the Tuesdays, all the visits, all the conversations that had led to this moment. She thought about the proposal in the smithy, about the wedding that had joined their lives, about every moment since that had brought them to this place. And she was grateful. Grateful for every single Tuesday, every single day, every single moment with this man who had loved her so completely. The cowboy who had kept returning until he asked her to marry him had given her a life beyond anything she could have dreamed. The stars came out one by one, dotting the vast Kansas sky with points of light. Samuel squeezed her hand gently, and Adelaide squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. They had said everything that mattered long ago, and now they simply existed together. Two souls joined so completely that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Inside, one of the grandchildren called for them, and Adelaide smiled. "We should go in." "In a minute," Samuel said. "Let me just sit here with you a little longer. There is nowhere else I would rather be." So they sat, watching the stars and holding hands, and Adelaide knew that this was happiness. Not the grand, sweeping kind that poets wrote about, but the quiet, steady kind that came from sharing your life with someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. The kind that came from building something together, brick by brick, day by day, Tuesday by Tuesday. Eventually they went inside where their family waited. But Adelaide carried that moment with her, tucking it away in her heart alongside all the other precious moments she had collected over 33 years of marriage. And she knew that no matter how many years remained to them, whether it was 1 or 10 or 30 more, she would treasure every single day with the man who had ridden into her life and stayed. The story of Adelaide and Samuel was not one of grand adventure or dramatic rescues. It was simpler than that, and perhaps all the more beautiful for its simplicity. It was a story of persistence and patience, of a cowboy who returned week after week until the woman he loved agreed to take a chance on him. It was a story of hard work and building a life together, of facing challenges and celebrating triumphs side by side. It was, in the end, a love story in the truest sense. And it all began with a horseshoe, and a Tuesday morning in 1878, when Adelaide Wright met Samuel Everett, and both of their lives changed forever.